You stand at the base of a hill, your gaze drawn upward through the morning mist to the silhouette that has called to you for so long. The castle, not just any castle, the castle that locals refuse to name directly, referring to it only as the old place or that forsaken pile. A structure whose weathered stones have absorbed the passing of 8 centuries, whose walls have witnessed plagues, wars, betrayals, and deaths too numerous to count. The castle, whose name appears in hushed tones in obscure historical texts, always accompanied by warnings, always surrounded by accounts of those who entered and were changed. The road leading up is barely maintained, a remnant of what was once perhaps a proud approach for nobles and couriers. Nature reclaims it inch by inch, season by season. Wild grasses push between ancient cobblestones, creating a patchwork of gray and green that stretches before you like a frayed tapestry. Your footsteps sound unnaturally loud in the stillness, each crunch of gravel beneath your shoes a small violation of the silence that blankets this forgotten place. The morning air should feel fresh, invigorating, but it doesn't. It weighs upon your skin, cool and slightly damp, carrying the earthy scent of moss and stone and something else, something older and less definable. With each step upward, the air seems to thicken, as though the atmosphere itself resists your approach. You notice how the birds that had been singing in the valley below have fallen silent. No insects buzz, no small creatures rustle in the underbrush. The world narrows to the sound of your breathing, your footfalls, and the slow, persistent beating of your heart. 3/4 of the way up, you pause, ostensibly to catch your breath, but in truth, to gather your resolve. From this vantage point, you can see more clearly the state of the castle's exterior. The 4 corner towers rise at uneven heights, their tops partially crumbled like broken teeth against the pale sky. The once proud battlements are now jagged, irregular lines, punctuated by empty spaces where stones have fallen away. Ivy climbs much of the southern wall, a living shroud clinging to dead stone. Windows, some with remnants of stained glass, others gaping holes, peer down like vacant eyes. You've read the historical accounts, of course. Construction begun in 1187 under Lord William de Montfort, completed 23 years later after his mysterious disappearance. Home to the de Montfort line until its extinction in 1382 during the Black Death. Passed through 7 noble families thereafter, each suffering unusual misfortunes, children born with strange afflictions, heirs dying in improbable accidents, entire bloodlines withering into madness and eventual extinction. Abandoned as a residence in 1721, after the last owner, the reclusive Duke of Hemmingford, was found wandering the parapets at midnight, his skin cold as stone, his eyes reportedly filled with something other than human knowing. Since then, the castle has stood largely empty, save for occasional visits from historians, paranormal investigators, or the foolishly curious, like you. All the accounts you've studied share one peculiar similarity. They end abruptly, as though the writers simply stopped mid-documentation. Some blamed poor record-keeping, others suggested more troubling reasons. You resume your climb, aware that the mist has thickened around you. Though the sun has risen higher, it shouldn't be mistier now. It contradicts the natural order of things. Yet here you are, moving through a white veil that parts reluctantly before you and closes possessively behind. The castle appears and disappears in the shifting whiteness, sometimes seeming farther away, sometimes unnervingly close, as though it moves of its own accord. Finally, you reach the end of the path. Before you stands the infamous gate, set within an outer wall, that stretches 15 feet high on either side. The gate itself is massive, 12 feet of ancient oak, banded with iron, that has oxidized to a deep rust red that uncomfortably resembles dried blood. The wood is scarred, not just with age, but with what appear to be deliberate markings, symbols or letters, in a script you cannot decipher. They run along the edges of the door in neat rows, then spiral inward, growing increasingly erratic toward the center, as though whoever carved them became frenzied in their work. There is no visible lock, no handle, no obvious mechanism for opening, just a small metal plate, at approximately chest height, tarnished nearly black with age, bearing an inscription in Latin, Qui intrat non exit, idem. Who enters does not leave the same. You've come too far to be deterred by ominous warnings. You place your palm against the weathered wood, feeling the grain beneath your skin, the surprising warmth of it despite the cool morning air. You push gently, expecting resistance. The gate swings inward without a sound. This is wrong. Ancient hinges should creak. Disused doors should protest movement. There should be the groan of wood, the scream of metal, the protest of stone, as the threshold is crossed for the first time in how long? Years? Decades? But there is nothing, just a silent invitation inward. You step through, and immediately feel it, the weight of attention. Not just one pair of eyes, but many, countless, pressing against your consciousness from all directions. You turn quickly, scanning the courtyard and the inner walls, the crumbling battlements, the empty windows. Nothing moves. Nothing lives. Yet, the sensation persists. You are observed, assessed, measured by entities you cannot perceive. The courtyard stretches before you, once grand, now a testament to neglect. Stone pathways, cracked and heaved by centuries of freezing winters, wind through what were once formal gardens, now wild tangles of vegetation. At the center stands a fountain, dry for generations, its basin filled with leaves and debris, its once proud statuary worn featureless by time and weather. Was that figure meant to be Neptune, Poseidon, or something older, something pagan that predates Christian iconography? You make your way toward the main entrance, stepping carefully on the uneven ground. The castle's facade looms above you, a study in architectural periods, layered one upon another. Norman foundation, Gothic additions, Renaissance embellishments, Georgian modifications. Like geological strata, the building records its own history in stone and style, each layer representing a different era of human ambition and folly. The massive front doors stand partially open, as though the castle has been expecting you. Another impossibility. These doors, 2 stories high and carved from a wood so dark it's nearly black, would require several strong men to move. Yet they stand ajar just enough for a single person to slip through, just enough for you. Before entering, you turn back to look at the gate through which you came. It is closed. No, that's not quite accurate. It has sealed itself, the wood seeming to meld with the stone archway around it, as though the entrance you used never existed at all. This should alarm you more than it does, but a strange lethargy has begun to settle over your thoughts, a dreamlike acceptance of the impossible. You turn back to the entrance. To proceed would be madness. Every instinct warns against it. The gate that closes itself, the unseen watchers, the unnatural silence. These are not the characteristics of a mere historical site. They are the harbingers of something older and more dangerous than you have prepared for. And yet, you find yourself drawn forward, across the threshold, into the great hall beyond. The air inside is different, not musty, as one might expect, but cold and somehow dense, as though it possesses more substance than ordinary air. It fills your lungs reluctantly, making each breath a conscious effort. The great hall rises 3 stories to a vaulted ceiling, its rafters lost in shadow. What light enters comes from the high windows, dust-filtered and weak, creating shafts that seem solid enough to touch. The floor is stone, worn in paths by centuries of footsteps, indentations that trace the daily movements of people long dead, their routines preserved in the very substance of the place. At the far end stands a massive fireplace, large enough for a man to stand upright within. Its hearth is cold, of course, has been cold for centuries, yet you cannot shake the impression that something glowed there just moments before your arrival, that embers still pulse beneath the ash, and that if you waited, watched patiently enough, you might see them flare to life of their own accord. On either side of the great hall, sweeping staircases rise to a gallery that runs the perimeter of the room, providing access to the castle's upper floors. The banisters are carved with figures, human, animal, and things that seem neither or both, their features distorted either by artistic intent or the erosive passage of time. You stand motionless, absorbing the scale, the age, the oppressive silence of the place. And then, a sound, so faint you might have imagined it, a whisper of movement, like fabric brushing against stone from somewhere above. Your eyes dart upward, scanning the gallery, expecting to see someone, a caretaker perhaps, another visitor, any human presence that might dispel the growing unease in your chest. Nothing, only shadows, and the dust motes dancing in the beams of diffuse light, and the weight of centuries pressing down upon you. You become aware, suddenly and acutely, of your heartbeat, its rhythm slightly too fast, slightly too hard. The sound of it fills your ears, a persistent reminder of your vulnerability, your mortality, in this place that has outlasted countless human lives. You draw a deeper breath, forcing calm upon yourself. You are an educated person, a rational person. This is merely architecture, merely history. Stone and wood cannot harm you. And yet, as you move further into the great hall, your footsteps echoing hollowly against the walls, you cannot shake the certainty that something has noticed your presence. Something has stirred from a long dormancy. Something watches, evaluates, considers. The sensation of being observed intensifies with each step. It's in the prickle, at the nape of your neck, the involuntary tightening of muscles between your shoulder blades, as your body instinctively braces for something to fall upon you from behind. There is nothing, of course, nothing but your imagination and the weight of historical knowledge, the accounts you've read of others who entered this place and reported similar sensations before their testimonies abruptly ended. You press onward, drawn to a corridor that leads from the right side of the great hall. The ceiling here is lower, more intimate, more confining. Tapestries hang on the walls, once vibrant with color and narrative, now faded to muted browns and grays, their scenes barely discernible. You pause before one, squinting to make out its subject. Gradually, forms emerge from the faded threads, figures engaged in what might be a hunt, or perhaps a battle. The central figure appears to be falling or flying, arms outstretched, or are those arms at all? The longer you stare, the less human the proportions seem, until you're no longer certain what you're seeing. A chill passes through you, not from the air, but from within, a cold that begins in your marrow and works outward through flesh. You step back from the tapestry, suddenly unwilling to interpret its imagery any further. The corridor continues, turning left, then right, then left again, in a way that seems deliberately disorienting. You should have reached an exterior wall by now, based on your mental map of the castle's layout, yet the passage continues inward, descending slightly with each turn. The light grows dimmer, the air cooler. The walls here are rougher stone, more ancient than the refined masonry of the great hall, suggesting you've passed into the oldest part of the castle, perhaps even predating the official construction date of 1187, and still that persistent feeling of being followed, of eyes upon your back. Several times you turn quickly, hoping to catch sight of whoever or whatever trails you, but the corridor behind remains empty. Or does it? In the moment of turning, in the split second before your vision settles, you think you detect movement, a shadow withdrawing around a corner, the trailing edge of something passing out of sight. You've gone too far now to easily retrace your steps. The corridor has taken too many turns, and you realize with growing disquiet that you've lost track of direction. Which way leads back to the great hall? Which way leads deeper into the labyrinthine interior? The castle seems to have swallowed you, drawn you into its complex digestive system of halls and passages, and now you must continue forward, hoping to find another way out. The passage widens suddenly into a circular chamber, with 5 identical doorways spaced evenly around its circumference. The ceiling rises to form a dome, at the center of which is an aperture open to the sky above. A single beam of sunlight falls through this opening, illuminating a circular design inlaid in the stone floor, an intricate pattern of interlocking symbols similar to those carved on the main gate. You stand in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to determine which doorway you emerged from, and more importantly, which might lead toward an exit. They all look the same, arched openings of identical height and width, leading to passages that quickly fall into shadow. No distinguishing features, no markings to indicate their destinations. As you turn, considering your options, you become aware that the quality of light in the room has changed. The sunbeam falling through the central aperture has shifted, impossible, given the short time you've been standing here. The sun doesn't move that quickly across the sky, yet the beam now illuminates a different section of the floor pattern, highlighting symbols that were previously in shadow. And something else has changed. The feeling of being watched has intensified, concentrated. Before, it was a generalized sensation, ambient and diffuse. Now it has a direction, a source. It emanates from one of the 5 doorways, the one directly behind you. You don't want to turn. Every instinct screams against it. But you must. You cannot stand here forever, with your back to whatever waits in that darkened archway. You turn, slowly, muscles tense, breath held. The doorway is empty. The passage beyond is dark, but not impenetrably so. You can see perhaps 15 feet down its length before it curves out of view. Nothing moves within that visible space. Nothing waits, and yet the sensation persists. A focused attention, an assessment, an intent that you cannot identify, but instinctively fear. You back away, keeping your eyes on that empty doorway, until you feel another archway behind you. Without looking, you step backward through it, into another passage, away from that circular room, with its shifting light and its watching presence. This new corridor is different, wider, with a higher ceiling, and illuminated by narrow windows set high in the outer wall. You've reached the perimeter of the castle. Then, these windows face east, judging by the angle of sunlight, which means you've been traveling roughly northward through the building's interior. If you follow this corridor, it should eventually lead to the north wing, and perhaps to an exit. You walk more quickly now, eager to put distance between yourself and whatever waited in that circular chamber. The corridor is long and straight, a mercy after the disorienting twists of the previous passage. Doors line the inner wall at regular intervals, chambers, storerooms, perhaps servants' quarters from centuries past, all are closed. You try the handle of one, finding it locked, or perhaps stuck. With age, you consider forcing it, then think better of it. Better to find your way out of this place than to explore further. The corridor ends in a T-junction. To the left, a grand archway opens onto what appears to be a library or study, walls lined with shelves, tables covered with objects hidden under dusty cloths. To the right, the passage continues, eventually turning out of sight. You choose right, staying on what you hope is a path toward an exit. The windows continue, providing orientation and the comforting knowledge that the outside world still exists, that this place has not somehow swallowed you into a realm of its own making, divorced from reality. As you walk, you become aware of a sound, the first you've heard since entering the castle, besides your own movements, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like raindrops on glass or fingernails on wood. It comes from above, from the ceiling perhaps, or from the floor above. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. You stop, listening. The tapping continues, maintaining its irregular but somehow deliberate rhythm, not random, not mechanical, but purposeful, communicative, as though something is signaling, sending a message in a code you cannot decipher, and then it stops. The silence rushes back in, more absolute than before, as though the brief intrusion of sound has only emphasized the unnatural quiet of this place. You wait, listening for its resumption, but nothing comes. Just the soft sound of your own breathing, the whisper of fabric as you shift position. You continue walking, more quickly now, turning a corner to find the corridor opening into a large octagonal room. This appears to be some sort of gallery or receiving room, with tall windows along 3 of the 8 walls, providing views of the castle grounds to the north and east. The remaining walls are lined with portraits, dozens of them, arranged in chronological order, judging by the styles of clothing and painting techniques. The earliest, nearest the entrance where you stand, dates perhaps to the early 13th century. Stiff, flat renderings of stern-faced nobles in medieval garb. As the portraits progress around the room, the styles evolve, the increasing realism of Renaissance techniques, the somber dignity of Tudor-era paintings, the elaborate detail of Baroque works, the refined elegance of Georgian portraiture. You're reminded of the castle's history, how it passed from family to family, each falling to misfortune, each yielding to a new bloodline that would in turn wither and fail within these walls. These must be those ill-fated occupants, preserved in oil and canvas, their likenesses surviving long after their actual bodies return to dust. You move slowly along the gallery, studying the faces. Despite the different eras, different styles, different artists, there is something unsettlingly similar about all of them. Something in the eyes perhaps, a particular quality of gaze that seems to follow you as you move. Not the usual illusion of painted eyes that appear to track a viewer's movement, but something more deliberate, more aware. And there is something else, a progression that becomes apparent only after you've viewed a dozen or more portraits. The earliest images show healthy, robust individuals, proud lords and ladies in the prime of life. But as the chronology advances, as the centuries pass portrait by portrait, the subjects change. Their faces grow paler, their eyes more sunken, their postures less vital. By the 18th century, the final portraits in the sequence The figures appear almost cadaverous, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes hollow, lips bloodless. The last portrait is different from the others. Larger, more ornately framed, it dominates the wall at the far end of the gallery. Even from a distance, you can see that it depicts a man in evening clothes of early 18th century style, the Duke of Hemmingford, you presume, the castle's final resident. Unlike the other portraits, where the subjects are posed in conventional settings, libraries, drawing rooms, gardens, this man stands upon what appears to be the castle's highest tower, beneath a night sky filled with stars arranged in patterns you do not recognize from any earthly constellation. His face is thin to the point of emaciation, his complexion pallid, his eyes are wrong. The artist has painted them not with pupils and irises, but as solid black orbs that reflect pinpoints of light from those alien stars above. His mouth is set in what might be a smile, though it contains no mirth, no human warmth. And as you stare at this disturbing image, you become aware that the tapping has resumed, that same rhythmic pattern from before, but closer now, seemingly emanating from within the very wall on which the portrait hangs. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 you back away, unwilling to remain in this room with its degenerating portraits and that final inhuman image with its solid black eyes. The tapping follows you, moving within the wall, keeping pace as you retreat toward the doorway through which you entered. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. You turn and walk quickly back along the corridor, no longer concerned with finding an exit route, simply wanting to put distance between yourself and that sound, that portrait, that room, with its visual record of human deterioration. The sound follows, not from the walls now, but from the ceiling above, moving as you move, matching your pace. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. You break into a run, retracing your steps, passing the T-junction, taking the left turn this time, back toward the circular chamber with its 5 doorways. Anything to escape that following, pacing sound with its deliberate rhythm. You burst into the circular room, momentarily disoriented by its identical archways. Which one leads toward the great hall, toward the main entrance, toward escape? The beam of sunlight through the central aperture has shifted again, now illuminating the very center of the floor pattern, where previously unseen symbols glow with an almost metallic sheen. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. The sound has entered the room with you, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the domed space with its insistent rhythm. And now, for the first time, you notice that the floor pattern is responding to it. Subtle shifts in the stonework, barely perceptible movements, like ripples in water, spreading outward from the central point with each tap. You choose a doorway at random, desperate to escape, and rush through it into another corridor, this one unfamiliar, descending at a steep angle, its walls rough-hewn from the living bedrock beneath the castle. Not the way you came then, not the way out, but anything is better than remaining in that circular chamber with its animate floor and omnipresent tapping. The corridor descends, curves, descends further. The air grows cooler, damper. The stone walls glisten with moisture that appears to seep from within rather than condense from without. There are no windows here, no natural light, yet you can see a phosphorescent glow emanates from the very stone itself, a pale blue-green luminescence that provides just enough illumination to navigate by. You've entered a part of the castle not described in any historical record you've studied, not marked on any architectural plan, a subterranean level that by all rights shouldn't exist given the castle's hilltop position. Yet here you are, moving deeper into the earth, away from sunlight, away from the world above, and still the sensation of being watched, being followed, persists. It prickles along your skin, raises the fine hairs on your arms and the back of your neck. Something comes behind you, something keeps pace, something waits for you to stop, to turn, to acknowledge its presence. But you won't, you can't. To do so would be to confront whatever inhabits this place, whatever has claimed the lives or sanity of all who dwelled here before, and you're not ready for that, not yet. So you press on, deeper into the castle's impossible depths, guided by that unnatural glow, pursued by that patient tapping, surrounded by the weight of centuries, and the attention of entities you cannot see but feel with every fiber of your being. You wouldn't last a day in this castle. Few have. None have emerged unchanged. And as you descend further into its secrets, you begin to understand why. The phosphorescent corridor finally levels out, widening into what appears to be a subterranean antechamber. The glow is stronger here, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, illuminating a space that defies your expectations of what should exist beneath a medieval castle. This is no crude dungeon, no simple storage cellar. The room before you is elegant, almost ceremonial in its design. A perfect circle, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, its domed ceiling supported by slender columns of a stone so black it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. Between these columns stand niches, each containing a statue of such exquisite craftsmanship that they appear almost alive in the shifting blue-green light. You approach the nearest, studying its features with growing unease. The figure is humanoid, but not quite human, the proportions subtly wrong, the limbs too long, the head slightly too large and oddly shaped. The face is smooth, devoid of features, except for deep-set eyes that seem to watch you even in stone immobility. You step back, turning slowly to survey the room. 8 niches, 8 statues, all identical in their unsettling almost humanity. And at the center of the chamber, a raised dais upon which rests. What? From this distance, in this light, you cannot quite make it out. A structure of some kind, geometric yet organic, like a model of a DNA strand, crafted by someone who had only read descriptions of such things and never seen images. You approach the dais cautiously, aware that the tapping sound has ceased. The silence is absolute now, pressing against your eardrums like a physical force. Even your footsteps make no sound on the stone floor, as though the room itself consumes auditory vibrations, hungry for silence. The object on the dais resolves into clarity as you draw nearer. It is a model, but not of DNA or any other earthly structure. It resembles a building, a castle perhaps, but one whose architecture follows rules that contradict everything you know about physics and geometry. Towers that spiral, not upward, but inward, walls that appear to exist in more dimensions than the 3 you can perceive, courtyards that seem larger inside their boundaries than their outer measurements would allow. You recognize elements of the castle above, the great hall, the circular chamber with its 5 doorways, even the portrait gallery, but distorted, extended, connected in ways that the physical structure cannot possibly accommodate. This model depicts not the castle as it exists in objective reality, but the castle as it exists in some other state, some higher dimensional plane where space folds back upon itself, where inside and outside are meaningless distinctions, where rooms can be larger within than without. With sudden chilling clarity, you understand. The castle you entered is merely a projection, a three-dimensional shadow of a structure that exists primarily in dimensions you cannot directly perceive. What appears to you as a confusing labyrinth of corridors and chambers that shouldn't connect, but somehow do, is merely your limited perception struggling to comprehend a hyperdimensional architecture. No wonder those who dwelled here went mad. No wonder visitors disappeared or emerged changed to live within such a space. To daily confront the inadequacy of human perception would erode sanity as surely as water erodes stone. You back away from the model, from its impossible geometry and its implications. As you do, you become aware that the statues have shifted position. Not dramatically, you didn't see them move, but each has turned slightly, their featureless faces now oriented directly toward you, their eyeless gazes following your retreat. A doorway stands opposite from where you entered, a simple arch leading to another corridor. You take it without hesitation, unwilling to remain in that chamber with its watchful statues and its reality-defying model. The new passage ascends gently, curving to the right. The phosphorescent glow continues, providing just enough light to see by, though it seems to pulse more rapidly now, like a heart rate increasing with exertion or fear. The corridor emerges into what appears to be a more conventional part of the castle, a long gallery with high windows along one wall, letting in natural light that overwhelms the now fading phosphorescence. You've returned to the upper levels then, though you have no idea which part of the castle you now occupy. The windows face south, judging by the angle of sunlight, which means, what? Your sense of direction has become thoroughly confused by the castle's labyrinthine layout. The gallery is lined with display cases, glass-fronted cabinets containing artifacts that span centuries, medieval weaponry, Renaissance scientific instruments, Georgian silverware, Victorian curios. A museum of sorts, though arranged with no apparent chronological or thematic order. Items from wildly different periods and cultures jumbled together, as though time itself has been compressed and folded within these walls. You move along the gallery, glancing at the displays without lingering. Something about these objects disturbs you, not their variety or their arrangement, but a quality they all share, despite their disparate origins. Each item, whether a 13th century dagger or an 18th century clock, bears markings similar to those you saw on the main gate, on the floor of the circular chamber, on the strange model in the subterranean room. Tiny, precise engravings that form patterns your mind recognizes as significant without understanding why. At the end of the gallery stands a single pedestal displaying an object under a glass dome. Unlike the cluttered cabinets, this item is presented in isolation with a reverence that suggests particular importance. You approach, curious, despite your growing desire to find an exit from this place. The object is a book, ancient, its binding cracked leather reinforced with metal, its pages yellowed parchment, visible through the partially open cover. The title is embossed in faded gilt letters on the spine, in a language you cannot identify, but which bears similarities to both Latin and something more archaic, Proto-Germanic perhaps, or some older Indo-European root tongue. Through the glass, you can see that the visible page contains text in the same language, interspersed with diagrams that resemble architectural drawings, but like the model below, depict structures that could not exist in three-dimensional space. Alongside these are illustrations of beings that share the elongated, disproportionate features of the statues in the subterranean chamber. A small placard beside the pedestal bears the only English text you've seen since entering the castle. the architecture of higher realms and their inhabitants, transcribed by Wilfrid de Montfort, 1209. Below this, in smaller text, the original author remains unknown. Wilfrid de Montfort, son of the castle's builder, William, who disappeared before construction was completed. According to historical records, Wilfrid continued his father's work, but gradually withdrew from public life, becoming a recluse within these walls, communicating with the outside world only through occasional letters that became increasingly incoherent until they stopped altogether in early 1210. The first in a long line of the castle's residents to succumb to isolation and apparent madness. You step back from the display, uncomfortable with the implications. This book suggests that the elder de Montfort hadn't simply designed an unusually complex castle. He had attempted to create a structure that mirrored or perhaps interfaced with architectures that exist beyond normal human perception. And his son had documented this, had perhaps even communicated with the entities that inhabit such realms. A door at the far end of the gallery offers escape from these troubling thoughts. You take it, entering a wide corridor that appears to encircle the castle's central courtyard. Windows on the inner wall look down upon the fountain you saw earlier, the overgrown gardens, the paths choked with weeds. The angle of the light falling across the courtyard suggests it's now mid-afternoon. How is that possible? You entered the castle in the morning, and while you've wandered for what feels like hours, surely not that much time has passed. Unless, of course, time within these walls flows differently than it does outside. Another disturbing thought, another reason to find an exit as quickly as possible. You turn away from the windows, continuing along the corridor, which gradually curves to follow the castle's perimeter. Doors line the outer wall at regular intervals, guest chambers perhaps, or private apartments for the castle's historical occupants. All are closed, their dark wood surfaces polished to such a high sheen that they reflect the corridor behind you like imperfect mirrors. In one such reflection, you catch a glimpse of movement, something tall and thin, moving with a fluid grace that no human skeleton should permit. You spin around, heart hammering, but the corridor behind you is empty, just as it has been all along, just as it will remain no matter how many times you look, no matter how certain you are that something follows just out of sight. You continue walking, more briskly now, one hand trailing along the smooth stone wall for stability as much as guidance. The corridor seems to stretch longer than it should, given the castle's dimensions as viewed from outside. Another spatial impossibility, another reminder that this place operates according to rules you cannot comprehend. After what seems like too much time, too much distance, the corridor finally ends at a junction. To the left, a narrow passage leads toward what appears to be a servant's stairwell. To the right, a grander corridor continues, lined with tapestries similar to those you saw earlier. Straight ahead, double doors of dark wood stand closed, their surfaces carved with scenes of a hunt, human figures pursuing creatures that, like everything in this place, are almost but not quite recognizable as earthly animals. You choose the double doors, pushing them open to reveal a great dining hall. A massive table of polished oak runs the length of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs, upholstered in faded red velvet. Candelabras stand at intervals along the table, their candles unlit, but appearing fresh, as though prepared for guests expected imminently. The walls are panelled in the same dark wood as the doors, interspersed with portraits similar to those in the gallery you visited earlier. The same progression of increasingly gaunt, increasingly unwell-looking individuals who once called this place home. At the far end of the hall, a huge fireplace dominates the wall, its mantelpiece carved with the now familiar symbols that recur throughout the castle. Above this hangs the largest portrait yet, another depiction of the Duke of Hemmingford, the castle's final resident, but different from the one in the gallery. This shows him seated rather than standing, in an interior setting rather than atop a tower, dressed in more casual attire than formal evening wear. But the face is the same, emaciated, pallid, with those disturbing solid black eyes that reflect pinpoints of light, and something else, something you didn't notice in the other portrait. His hands, they rest in his lap, partially obscured by shadow, but visible enough to see that they are not human hands. The fingers are too numerous, too long, jointed in too many places, tapering to points that resemble claws more than fingernails. As you stare at this disturbing image, you become aware that the table behind you is no longer empty. You didn't hear anyone enter, didn't notice any movement, yet when you turn, you find the dining table set for a meal. Fine china plates at each place, crystal glasses filled with dark red liquid, silver cutlery polished to a mirror shine. Steam rises from covered dishes placed at intervals along the table's length. Your mind struggles to process this impossibility. There was no one here to set this table, no time during which you were distracted enough for servants to enter and prepare such an elaborate tableau. It simply wasn't here, and now it is, as though reality itself has shifted around you, rearranging the contents of the room while leaving your awareness untouched. And the places set at the table, you count them automatically, a futile attempt to impose rational thought on an irrational situation. 24 settings, 12 on each side, 24 chairs, all empty. No, not empty. As you look more closely, you see indentations in the velvet cushions, as though invisible bodies sit upon them. And the crystal glasses, the levels of dark liquid within them, lower slightly. As you watch, incremental decreases, as though being sipped by unseen mouths. You back toward the doors through which you entered, unwilling to remain in this room with its invisible diners, its impossible meal, its portrait of a man with inhuman eyes and inhuman hands. But the doors are no longer there. The wall behind you is solid, paneled wood with no break, no exit. The only door visible now is a small one beside the fireplace, beneath the disturbing portrait. There is no choice. You must cross the length of the dining hall, pass between those unseen presences, with their phantom meals and their imperceptibly emptying glasses. You move cautiously, keeping to the center of the room, as far from the occupied chairs as possible. As you pass each place setting, you feel attention shift toward you, invisible gazes following your progress, silent assessments being made of your intrusion. Halfway down the table, a knife falls, or is dropped, from beside one of the plates, clattering loudly on the wooden floor. You freeze, staring at the silver implement, now lying at your feet. After a moment's hesitation, courtesy, or perhaps fear prompts you to bend and retrieve it, replacing it carefully beside the plate from which it fell. As your fingers release the knife, you feel the lightest touch against the back of your hand, a brush of something cold and insubstantial, like a breath of winter air given momentary solidity. You snatch your hand back, continue walking, more quickly now, refusing to look at the chairs with their invisible occupants, the glasses with their slowly lowering levels of dark liquid. You reach the end of the room, the small door beside the fireplace. It opens at your touch, swinging inward, to reveal a narrow spiral staircase leading upward. You take it without hesitation, grateful to escape the dining hall with its unseen guests, untroubled by the fact that this staircase ascends rather than descends, takes you deeper into the castle rather than toward an exit. The stairs wind upward, the spacing of the steps irregular, forcing a disturbing arrhythmia to your climb. Some are too shallow, others too deep, Some slope slightly inward, others outward, creating a subtle vertigo as you ascend. The walls press close on either side, the rough stone occasionally brushing your shoulders, giving the unsettling impression that the staircase is gradually narrowing, constricting around you like the throat of some stone serpent. Finally, breathless more from anxiety than exertion, you emerge into a circular room that you recognize immediately as one of the castle's four corner towers, visible from the exterior. Windows on all sides confirm this, providing views in multiple directions across the surrounding landscape. It's sunset now, the western sky, a dramatic canvas of crimson and gold, the eastern already deepening to indigo. The impossibility of this time progression registers distantly, another violation of natural law that seems almost mundane compared to the other phenomena you've witnessed. The room appears to be a study or private library. Bookshelves line the walls between the windows, filled with volumes bound in leather of various colors and ages. A large desk occupies the center of the space, its surface covered with open books, loose papers covered in handwritten notes, and curious objects that might be scientific instruments or occult tools or both. You approach the desk cautiously, scanning the visible pages of the open books. Like the one displayed in the gallery, these contain text in that unrecognizable language interspersed with disturbing diagrams and illustrations. The handwritten notes appear to be translations or commentaries written in several different hands, evidence that multiple occupants of the castle over the centuries have studied these same texts, have grappled with their meaning and implications. One page catches your attention, not from the ancient books, but from the handwritten notes. It contains a diagram of the castle itself, but annotated with symbols that mark specific locations within the structure. The great hall, the circular chamber with its 5 doorways, the subterranean room with its statues, the dining hall, this very tower, all are indicated, along with dozens of other spaces you haven't yet visited. Lines connect these locations, forming a pattern that, when viewed as a whole, creates a symbol similar to those carved on the main gate. And beside this diagram, written in a shaky hand that suggests either great age or great distress in its author, a note in English: the pattern must be walked in full, the sequence must be completed, only then will they fully manifest. A chill passes through you as you study these words, their meaning unclear, but their tone, their implication, undeniably ominous. What pattern? What sequence? Who are they? Who will manifest when it is completed? You look up from the desk, toward the windows, seeking the reassurance of the outside world. The sun has set completely now, the landscape barely visible in the deepening twilight. Stars appear in the darkening sky, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds, their patterns strange and unfamiliar, not the constellations you know, not the stars visible from this part of the world, perhaps not stars that should be visible from Earth at all. And as you watch, certain stars seem to pulse, to brighten momentarily, and then dim, in a pattern that strikes you as deliberate, communicative, a sequence of stellar flashes that resembles nothing so much as the tapping you heard earlier. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 but transposed from sound to light, from tactile rhythm to visual code. You step back from the window, disturbed by these impossible stars, with their meaningless yet meaning-filled patterns. As you do, your elbow brushes one of the objects on the desk, a small metallic sphere balanced on a tripod of thin brass legs. It topples, rolling across the desk's surface and falling to the floor with a sound far louder than its size should produce, a deep, resonant tone, like a bell struck underwater. that sustains for several seconds before slowly fading. In the silence that follows, you become aware of a response, the tapping again, but coming from multiple directions simultaneously. From above, from below, from all sides. That same rhythm repeated, tap tap tap, pause, tap tap, pause, tap 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 tap, like a call and response, like a summoning, like a key turning in a lock. You must leave this room, this tower, with its impossible view of impossible stars, its desk covered in notes about patterns and sequences and manifestations. The door through which you entered stands open. The spiral staircase beyond, you hurry toward it, only to find that it no longer descends, but continues upward toward a part of the tower that shouldn't exist, given the exterior dimensions you observed from outside. No choice but to climb, to ascend into architectural impossibility, into spaces that shouldn't exist, but somehow do. The stairs wing tighter, the steps becoming even more irregular, the walls pressing closer, until you must turn sideways to continue upward. The quality of the stone changes, rougher, more ancient, with that same phosphorescent quality you observed in the subterranean levels, casting a pale blue-green glow that seems to emanate from within the rock itself. The staircase ends suddenly, opening into darkness, so complete it appears solid. You pause on the threshold, unwilling to step forward into that impenetrable black. As your eyes adjust, details gradually emerge. A vast, cavernous space extends before you, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor a complex inlay of stone in patterns that echo those you've seen throughout the castle. And standing in the center of this space, arranged in a circle facing outward, are 8 figures that you recognize immediately, despite having seen them only as statues before. Tall, thin entities with elongated limbs and oversized, oddly shaped heads. Their skin, if it can be called skin, has the same phosphorescent quality as the stone walls, glowing faintly in the darkness, illuminating featureless faces with deep-set eyes that now turn, as one, to regard you. You've found them, at last, or rather, they have allowed you to find them. The castle's true occupants, the entities that have driven generations of human residents to madness or death, the beings from higher realms documented in the book, attributed to Wilfred de Montfort. And as they regard you with those depthless eyes, you understand with sickening clarity that you've been drawn through the castle, along a specific route, through particular chambers, in a particular sequence, completing a pattern laid out centuries ago for precisely this purpose. You are not an accidental visitor. You are not an uninvited guest. You are the culmination of a process set in motion when the first stone of this castle was laid in 1187. Your arrival, your journey through these rooms, your presence at this final threshold, all were anticipated, planned, necessitated by forces operating on principles you cannot comprehend. The tapping sounds again, but you now recognize it as language. The entities communicate with each other in that rhythmic code, discussing you perhaps, or the process that brought you here, or what is to happen next. Their glowing bodies pulse slightly with each tap, confirming your suspicion that sound and light are merely different expressions of the same communicative act for these beings. One steps forward, its movements fluid in a way that suggests an entirely different muscular and skeletal structure than human anatomy allows. It extends a limb toward you, not quite an arm, with not quite a hand at its terminus, but similar enough in general position and apparent function that you understand the gesture as an invitation or perhaps a demand. You stand frozen, poised on the threshold between the narrow staircase behind you and the vast chamber with its waiting entities before you. To retreat would be futile. The castle has demonstrated repeatedly that it rearranges itself according to rules you cannot perceive, that doors do not lead where they should, that passages connect spaces that should be physically separate. There is no way back, no way out, no escape from this culminating moment. And so, with a resignation born of exhausted fear, you step forward into the chamber, toward the circle of waiting entities, toward whatever fate was determined for you centuries before your birth by intelligences operating beyond the boundaries of human understanding. The entity's not quite hand closes around your wrist, its touch cold as winter stone, yet somehow alive, vibrant with an energy that flows from it into you, up your arm, spreading throughout your body with each beat of your heart. Your vision blurs, doubles, fragments, the chamber around you seeming to fold and unfold, revealing dimensions normally imperceptible to human senses. And as your consciousness expands to encompass these new perceptions, as your understanding of reality itself undergoes a fundamental restructuring, you finally comprehend what this castle truly is, not merely a dwelling or a fortress, but a threshold, a point of intersection between your world and theirs, a carefully constructed interface between realities that operate according to entirely different physical laws. You see now why those who dwelled here changed over time, why their portraits showed a progressive detachment from human vitality. They were changing, evolving, becoming something that could exist in both realms simultaneously. The process was imperfect, incomplete, their physical bodies unable to fully adapt, their minds fracturing under the strain of perceptions they were never designed to accommodate. But you are different. You have completed the pattern, walked the sequence in its entirety, arrived at precisely the right moment when the stars aligned both literally and metaphorically. You are the final component in a machine constructed over centuries, the key that will fully open the door between worlds. The entity's grip tightens, its cold energy pulsing more strongly through your veins. The others move forward, encircling you, their featureless faces tilted as though in curiosity or anticipation. The tapping resumes, faster now, more urgent, a communication you can almost understand as your mind continues to expand, to transform under their influence. And as the boundaries of your identity begin to dissolve, as the distinction between your consciousness and the castle itself becomes increasingly blurred, you know with absolute certainty that you will never leave this place, at least, not as the person who entered. You will remain as all the others remained, absorbed into the pattern, incorporated into the sequence, another link in the chain that connects this world to theirs. The room around you pulses with light, not the phosphorescence from before, but something brighter, purer, emanating from the very fabric of reality. As the barrier between dimensions grows increasingly permeable, through this light, through the gaps it illuminates in the structure of your world, you catch glimpses of what lies beyond, architectures that defy comprehension, entities far larger and stranger than those that surround you, a realm where thought and matter are interchangeable, where consciousness itself is the primary building block of existence. The tapping reaches a crescendo, a complicated pattern that repeats 3 times before resolving into a single, sustained note that you feel rather than hear, a vibration that resonates with your bones, your tissues, the very atoms of your being. The light intensifies to an unbearable degree, then suddenly extinguishes, plunging the chamber into a darkness more complete than anything you've experienced before, a darkness that exists not merely as an absence of light, but as a positive force, a tangible substance that fills your lungs when you breathe, that presses against your skin from all sides. In this darkness, you feel the entity release your wrists, feel the circle around you widen. Something has changed in you, in them, in the relationship between your world and theirs. Some threshold has been crossed, some transaction completed. You stand alone now in the center of the chamber, your body feeling simultaneously heavier and lighter than before, as though subject to gravitational forces from multiple dimensional planes. Slowly, the darkness recedes, or perhaps your perception adapts to it. The chamber reappears around you, but altered, the same space, yet somehow more extensive, revealing aspects previously hidden from your limited senses. The entities are still present, still arranged in a circle, but they appear differently now, more substantial in some ways, more ethereal in others, as though you're perceiving multiple aspects of their existence simultaneously. One gestures toward a doorway that you're certain wasn't there before, an arch of stone that glows with that same phosphorescence, leading to a corridor that descends gently, an exit perhaps, a way out of this chamber, this tower, this castle, or merely the next stage in a journey that has no true ending, only continued transformation. You move toward it without conscious decision, your body responding to some imperative deeper than thought. As you pass the threshold, you glance back at the entities standing motionless in their circle. In the shifting light, their featureless faces seem almost to smile, an expression of satisfaction, of completion, of a plan, centuries in the making, finally reaching its culmination. The corridor beyond descends in a gradual spiral, not a staircase, but a smooth ramp that curves gently downward. The walls glow more intensely here, illuminating your path with that same blue-green phosphorescence that seems so characteristic of the boundary zones between dimensions. You walk steadily, your footsteps making no sound on the stone floor, your breathing strangely loud in the silence. Time loses meaning as you descend. Minutes might be hours, hours might be mere seconds. Your perception of duration has been altered, along with your perception of space, leaving you adrift in a continuum where past, present, and future seem to exist simultaneously rather than sequentially. Eventually, the corridor levels out, widening into another circular chamber, smaller than the one above, more intimate in its proportions. At its center stands a pedestal supporting a small object that pulses with light in a now familiar rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. The same pattern you've heard throughout the castle, now translated into visual form. You approach, drawn by that rhythmic light. The object resolves into clarity, a crystal sphere about the size of your palm, within which colors shift and swirl in patterns too complex to track with conscious attention. Looking into its depths is like looking into the structure of reality itself, seeing the interconnected layers of existence that comprise the multiverse. Without knowing why, you reach out and lift the sphere from its pedestal. It feels warm in your hands, alive somehow, resonating with the same energy that flowed into you from the entity's touch. As you hold it, images flood your mind, the castle as it has existed through centuries, its occupants as they lived and changed and eventually transcended, the entities as they waited patiently for each phase of their grand design to unfold. And you see yourself entering the gate that shouldn't open, walking the pattern, completing the sequence. But you also see what comes after, your continued existence within these walls, your gradual transformation into something neither fully human nor fully below your role as custodian of this threshold between worlds, because that's what the castle requires, a human consciousness to serve as intermediary, to maintain the delicate balance between dimensions, to ensure that the door remains neither fully closed nor fully open. Each previous occupant served this purpose for a time, until their humanity eroded too completely for them to function effectively in the role. Then a new custodian was required, a new mind to be gradually reshaped, a new perspective through which both realms could be perceived and understood. Now, it is your turn. You will remain here, walking these halls that connect dimensions, maintaining the patterns that allow controlled interaction between realities. You will watch the outside world through windows that frame a planet increasingly foreign to your transformed perception. You will wait for the occasional visitor, foolish or fated enough to enter through the gate that shouldn't open, to guide them through the pattern, if they are suitable, to release them changed, but not enlightened, if they are not. You will exist in a state, neither fully alive nor truly dead, your consciousness expanded beyond human limitations, yet forever tethered to your human origins. You will be the castle's voice, its eyes, its hands, the interface through which it interacts with the world that built it, but could never truly contain it. The sphere grows warmer in your grasp, its swirling colors accelerating, its light pulsing more rapidly. It is showing you how to begin, what must be done first, in your new role as custodian. You must return to the upper levels, to the study with its desk covered in notes and diagrams. You must continue the work of all who came before, documenting the pattern for those who will come after. For while your tenure may last centuries rather than decades, eventually you too will become too transformed to serve effectively as intermediary, and another must be prepared to take your place. The sphere pulses once more brightly, then dims to a steady glow, its message delivered, its instructions clear. It waits now for your acknowledgement, your acceptance of the role for which you've been prepared without knowing, and you find yourself nodding, a gesture of assent that feels both completely voluntary and utterly inevitable. What choice do you have, really? To reject this role would be to reject the transformation already begun within you, to remain trapped between states of being, neither fully human nor fully adapted to perceive the higher dimensions, now partially accessible to your expanded consciousness. You return the sphere to its pedestal, understanding that you will consult it often in the days and years and centuries to come. Then you turn toward a doorway that opens as you approach, not the corridor through which you entered, but a different path, leading upward toward the castle's main levels, toward the beginnings of your duties as custodian. As you ascend, you feel the castle around you in a way you couldn't before, not as mere architecture, but as a living entity of sorts, a conscious arrangement of space and dimension with its own purposes and perceptions. You feel the presences that inhabit it, both the humanoid entities you encountered in the chamber above, and other, less defined consciousnesses that exist in the boundary spaces between dimensions. And you feel the weight of time, not just the centuries the castle has stood upon this hillside, but the vaster durations it has existed in those other realms where time flows differently, where what appears to human perception as 800 years might be either a mere moment or an eternity, depending on one's position relative to the dimensional barriers. You emerge into the great hall where your journey began, seeing it now with your transformed perception, the mundane historical structure overlaid with its higher dimensional aspects, the apparently solid stone of its walls permeable to energies and entities from realms beyond. What seemed imposing and intimidating before now appears familiar, comfortable, like a garment tailored precisely to your form. You move through the space with a new confidence, understanding its purpose not merely as an architectural flourish or a display of feudal wealth and power, but as a calibrated component in a machine designed to facilitate controlled interaction between dimensions. Every alcove, every archway, every seemingly decorative element serves a function in maintaining the delicate balance between worlds. The main doors stand open, offering a view of the courtyard beyond, the gate through which you entered what seems like a lifetime ago, but was perhaps only hours. You approach this threshold, curious to see how the outside world appears to your altered perception. The courtyard is bathed in moonlight, the overgrown gardens silvered, the dry fountain a study in contrasts of light and shadow. Beyond the open gate, it never truly closed, you now realize, merely appeared to do so as your perception shifted. The path winds down the hillside toward the world of ordinary human existence. You could leave. Nothing physically prevents it. You could walk through that gate, descend the hill, return to the life you knew before entering this place, but you already understand the impossibility of truly returning. Your consciousness has been altered, expanded in ways that cannot be reversed. The patterns you've walked, the sequences you've completed, the transformations you've begun, all have changed you fundamentally. You might exist in the outside world, might move among humans who perceive nothing unusual about you, but you would never again be fully part of that reality. Better to remain here, where your altered state serves a purpose, where your expanded perception allows you to function as intermediary between dimensions, where your gradual transformation from human to other can proceed under controlled conditions rather than in an environment unsuited to such fundamental changes in the nature of consciousness. You turn away from the door, from the moonlit courtyard, from the gate that leads back to a world you can no longer fully inhabit. The castle waits, your castle now, your domain, your responsibility. Centuries of custodianship stretch before you, of maintaining the threshold between worlds, of guiding those who, like you, are drawn to enter through the gate that shouldn't open. The tapping begins again, that rhythmic communication from the entities that share this liminal space. But now, with your altered perception, with your expanding consciousness, you begin to understand it not merely as sound or code, but as language, as concept, as direct transmission of thought from one mind to another, without the imperfect intermediary of words. They are welcoming you, acknowledging your acceptance of the role for which you've been prepared, confirming your place in the ongoing work of maintaining the intersection between dimensions. You respond without knowing exactly how, your thoughts forming into patterns that pulse outward, that resonate with the very fabric of the castle itself. A dialogue begins between you and the entities, between you and the castle, between you and aspects of reality previously imperceptible to your limited human senses. And as this communion deepens, as your understanding expands further, you move deeper into the castle, into rooms you haven't yet visited, into sections of the structure that exist partially in this dimension and partially in others. Your transformation continues, your custodianship begins, your existence as something neither fully human nor fully other unfolds with each step, each breath, each pulse of energy through the stone walls that both contain and liberate you. The castle has claimed another keeper. The pattern continues. The door between worlds remains ajar, neither fully open nor completely closed, maintained in perfect equilibrium by your presence, your perception, your gradual metamorphosis from transient visitor to eternal custodian. And somewhere, beyond the gate that shouldn't open, another curious soul, a approaches the foot of the hill, gazes upward at the silhouette of towers against the sky, and begins the long climb toward a threshold they cannot truly comprehend until they cross it, toward a transformation they cannot imagine until it begins within them. The cycle continues, the pattern endures, the castle waits, as it has always waited, for those drawn to enter. Months pass, or perhaps years. Time flows differently within these walls, measured not in days and nights, but in cycles of energy that pulse between dimensions, in patterns of stellar alignments, visible only through the castle's specially designed windows, in the gradual progression of your own transformation, from human to intermediary to something yet undefined. You've settled into your role as custodian, learning the castle's rhythms, its needs, its functions as a threshold between realities. You maintain the physical structure where necessary, though much of what appears to be decay from a human perspective is actually intentional design. The crumbling aspects, the overgrown sections, the apparently abandoned character that discourages casual visitors while beckoning those drawn by deeper currents. You've learned to communicate with the entities that share this space, not through words, but through that rhythmic tapping that you now understand as a simplified form of their actual language, a concession to your still partially human consciousness that cannot yet directly perceive the multidimensional thought structures of their native mode of expression. They are patient teachers, ancient custodians of knowledge that predates human civilization, guardians of the boundaries between realms that must remain separate yet connected for reasons you're only beginning to comprehend. And you've studied the records left by those who preceded you in this role, journals, notes, diagrams, translations of texts from beyond this dimension, accounts of transformations similar to your own. William de Montfort, you've learned, was not the castle's builder, but its first human custodian, drawn to this hilltop by forces he could not name, to construct a physical interface for entities he perceived only in dreams and visions. His disappearance before construction was completed was no mystery. He simply progressed beyond the point where human society could perceive or interact with him, withdrawing into the higher dimensional aspects of the structure he helped create. His son Wilfred followed, as did generations of others, each drawn to the castle, each guided through the pattern, each transformed into a custodian for a time, before advancing beyond that transitional state into something else entirely. The records are incomplete, the language often obscure or allegorical, but you gather that the final stage of transformation involves a complete transcendence of physical form, an evolution of consciousness into a state that can exist fully in those higher dimensions without the need for a human or humanoid body. You're not there yet, not even close. Your transformation proceeds gradually by design. Too rapid a change would destroy your utility as an intermediary, would negate the very purpose for which you were selected. You remain substantially human in form and partially human in perception, able to exist comfortably in both the physical castle and its higher dimensional extensions, able to communicate both with the entities and with the rare human visitor who crosses the threshold. You've had 3 such visitors since assuming your role as custodian. The first, a young woman with a camera and a notebook, fled before completing even the first segment of the pattern, her fear overwhelming her curiosity. You watched from the shadows as she ran back through the gate, returning to the world beyond, with nothing but unexplainable dread and a handful of photographs that would show only empty rooms, devoid of the energies and entities visible to more attuned perception. The second, an older man with equipment you recognized as meant for detecting paranormal phenomena, progressed further, wandering the corridors for hours, recording temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic variations that his instruments could detect, but his consciousness could not interpret. He left disturbed but unenlightened, clutching data that would confuse rather than clarify, his understanding fundamentally limited by the tools and conceptual frameworks he brought with him. The third, a middle-aged woman with no obvious equipment, no clear purpose beyond a quiet, determined curiosity. She progressed through the pattern, almost exactly as you had, room by room, threshold by threshold. You watched her progress with growing excitement, recognizing a potential successor, someone who might eventually relieve you of the custodianship when your own transformation advanced beyond the intermediary stage. But in the circular chamber with its 5 doorways, she chose differently than you had, taking the third arch rather than the fourth, breaking the sequence, invalidating the pattern. You felt the castle's response immediately, a subtle shift in its energies, a withdrawal of the higher dimensional aspects that had been gradually revealing themselves to her perception. She continued wandering for hours afterward, but now through merely physical spaces, empty of the presences and potentials that make this structure unique. Eventually she too departed, taking with her impressions of an interesting but ultimately conventional ruin, its paranormal reputation unconfirmed by her experience. None were suitable, none completed the pattern, none joined you in custodianship or relieved you of your solitary duty. And so you continue alone, maintaining the threshold, studying the records, advancing your transformation by careful degrees, waiting for another who might be drawn to enter, who might choose correctly, who might share this liminal existence, until you progress beyond it. The solitude does not trouble you as it once would have. Your consciousness has expanded to perceive the multitude of presences that inhabit the castle's higher dimensional aspects, not just the humanoid entities you first encountered, but a diverse ecosystem of intelligences that exist in the boundary spaces between realms. Their company is alien but not unwelcome, their perspectives fascinating, if not always comprehensible, to your still partially human mind. And there is a comfort in purpose, in understanding your role in a design whose complexity and significance exceeds anything you could have imagined before crossing the threshold. You are not merely existing. You are maintaining a critical interface between realities, preserving a balance established aeons before human consciousness evolved, continuing work that will persist long after what humans consider civilization has passed from Earth. Today, though today has little meaning, in a place where time flows unevenly, where dawn and dusk arrive according to patterns unrelated to the rotation of the planet, you are in the library, a room you've come to know intimately during your custodianship. Its shelves contain not only books from human history, but records from other dimensions, stored in formats that would be unrecognizable to human perception, crystalline structures that contain information in their molecular arrangements, fluid vessels whose contents shift in response to specific thought patterns, devices that interface directly with consciousness rather than physical senses. You're attempting to translate a particularly difficult text, a treatise on the mechanics of dimensional intersections, authored by an entity whose perception operates on 7 axes rather than the 3 or 4 counting time accessible to human sensation. It's slow work, requiring frequent consultation of the sphere in the subterranean chamber, whose swirling colors provide contextual clarification when your understanding falters. You're deeply absorbed in this task when you feel it, a disturbance in the castle's energetic field, a ripple in the subtle currents that flow continuously between dimensions. Someone has entered through the main gate. Someone new has crossed the threshold. You set aside the translation, your attention shifting outward, expanding to encompass the entire structure and its immediate surroundings. Yes, a human presence, a single individual moving cautiously through the courtyard toward the main entrance. A man, middle-aged, dressed for hiking rather than formal exploration, carrying a small backpack, but no obvious equipment. His energy signature suggests openness, curiosity, and a peculiar resonance with the castle's own frequencies, promising characteristics, potentially indicating compatibility with the pattern. You withdraw your expanded awareness, returning your focus to your physical form within the library. There are protocols for such arrivals, procedures established by generations of custodians before you. You must observe without immediately revealing your presence. You must allow the pattern to begin naturally, the visitor finding their own way through the initial stages. Only if they progress beyond a certain point, showing both aptitude and inclination for the sequence, may you intervene more directly. Moving to one of the library's high windows, you watch as the man enters the great hall below. His movements are careful, but not fearful, his attention shifting constantly, absorbing details, noticing aspects of the architecture that casual visitors typically overlook. He pauses before the massive fireplace, studying the symbols carved into its mantelpiece, with apparent recognition, or at least familiarity, in his expression. Interesting. He comes with prior knowledge, then, not a random tourist or thrill-seeker, but someone who has studied this place, perhaps even someone who has been drawn to it by the same subtle influences that drew you and all custodians before you. You follow as he moves from the great hall into the east corridor, the beginning of the pattern, the first step in the sequence. His pace is unhurried, yet purposeful, suggesting not aimless wandering, but deliberate exploration. At each junction, each doorway, he pauses, considering options before choosing a path, and each choice, to your growing excitement, corresponds with the pattern, left where the pattern requires left, right where it dictates right, straight ahead, where that is the designated route. You trail behind at a distance, moving through the castle's secret passages, observing through hidden apertures, your presence undetectable to normal human senses. The man continues his methodical progress through the sequence, from the tapestry corridor to the portrait gallery, from there to the circular chamber with its 5 doorways, choosing the 4th, just as you did, then onward to the subterranean levels, with their phosphorescent glow and watchful statues. At each stage his reactions mirror what yours had been, initial disorientation followed by a sort of dream-like acceptance, fear tempered by fascination, disbelief gradually yielding to a more expansive understanding of reality's true nature. He is following not just the physical path, but the psychological one, his consciousness expanding in response to the castle's graduated revelations. By the time he reaches the chamber with the model, that representation of the castle's higher dimensional structure, you are convinced this visitor is not random. He has been called, selected, prepared, just as you were, and like you, he has proven suitable, proceeding through the pattern without deviation, his mind flexible enough to adapt as the castle reveals more of its true nature with each threshold crossed. It is time to reveal yourself, to make the transition from unseen observer to guide, from custodian to initiator, the role you've prepared for since your own transformation began. You position yourself in the corridor he must take upon leaving the chamber with the model, standing in plain sight, allowing the phosphorescent light to illuminate your form. You've become accustomed to your altered appearance, the subtle elongation of your limbs, the gradual refinement of your features towards something less distinctly human, the faint luminescence of your skin in darkness. But you understand how shocking this vision might be to someone still fully human, still operating within the limited perceptual framework of ordinary existence. The man emerges from the chamber, his expression thoughtful, preoccupied with whatever insights the model has provoked in his expanding consciousness. He takes 3 steps before noticing your presence, before his eyes widen with the sudden realization that he is not alone in this place, that he likely assumed abandoned. He stops abruptly, his body tensing in what might be fear or simply surprise. His gaze sweeps over you, taking in your altered form, your not quite human proportions, the subtle glow that emanates from your skin. To his credit, he doesn't flee, doesn't shout, doesn't react with the panic that such a vision might provoke in a less prepared mind. Instead, after several heartbeats of silence, he speaks, his voice remarkably steady, given the circumstances. "You're the custodian," he says, not a question, but a statement of recognition. You incline your head slightly, acknowledging the correctness of his assessment. When you respond, your voice carries the slight resonance that has developed as your vocal structures have gradually altered to accommodate modes of communication beyond mere human speech. "And you have completed the first sequence of the pattern," you reply. "Few visitors progress so far. Fewer still make the correct choices at each junction. I've studied this place," he says, confirming your earlier supposition. "For years, from outside, from a distance, books, historical records, accounts from previous visitors, but they all contradict each other, or end abruptly, or describe physically impossible features. The castle resists conventional documentation," you explain. "It exists simultaneously in multiple dimensional planes. What can be perceived and recorded depends on the observer's position within those dimensions, their progression through the pattern, their receptivity to perceptions beyond ordinary human range." He nods, accepting this explanation more readily than you might have expected. "And you, were you like me once? A visitor who completed the pattern and changed?" "Yes." You see no reason for deception or obfuscation. This man has proven himself by his progress thus far, has demonstrated the mental flexibility necessary for further advancement. "I entered as you did, was guided as I now guide you, transformed as you will transform if you choose to continue." Transform into what exactly? There's caution in his voice now, but still no fear, or at least no fear sufficient to overcome his evident curiosity. "Into an intermediary," you answer, "a consciousness capable of perceiving and existing within multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, a custodian of this threshold between realms, maintaining the balance, facilitating controlled interaction between realities that would destroy each other if fully merged, yet require connection for the overall stability of the multiverse." He absorbs this, his expression suggesting intense mental activity as he integrates this information with whatever prior knowledge he brought with him. After a moment, he asks, "And after that?" The records suggest successive custodians, each serving for a time before, what? Dying, being replaced, transforming further, advancing, you clarify. "The intermediary stage, what I am now, what you would initially become, is transitional, a period of service, while consciousness expands beyond human limitations, but retains enough human perspective to function as interpreter between realms. Eventually, that consciousness evolves beyond the need for physical form entirely, transcending into states of existence, unconstrained by dimensional boundaries. And then, That knowledge is not accessible to me in my current state, you admit, just as certain aspects of my present existence would be incomprehensible to you in your current form. The transformation occurs in stages precisely because consciousness cannot leap from one perceptual framework to another without intermediate adaptation. He considers this, visibly weighing implications, possibilities, consequences. Then, with a decisiveness that confirms your assessment of his suitability, he asks, "What's the next step? Where do we go from here?" You gesture toward the corridor ahead, indicating the continuation of the pattern. The sequence proceeds upward from here, through chambers that will gradually reveal more of the castle's true nature, more of the entities with whom we share this threshold, more of the purpose for which this structure was created and has been maintained across centuries. And at the end, a choice, you say simply, to begin the transformation, to assume custodianship alongside me until my own evolution advances beyond the intermediary stage, or to depart, returning to the world beyond, with memories that will seem increasingly dreamlike with each passing day, with perceptions that human language cannot adequately express and human society cannot meaningfully acknowledge. He nods once, decisively. "Lead on." You turn, gesturing for him to follow, continuing along the ascending corridor that winds gradually upward from the subterranean levels toward the castle's higher chambers. As you walk, you become aware of the tapping, that rhythmic communication from the entities who share this liminal space, their equivalent of discussion, of observation, of evaluation. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. The man hears it too, his head tilting slightly as he tries to locate the source of the sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They're discussing you, you explain, assessing your progress, your potential, your compatibility with the transformative processes that would be required for custodianship. And their verdict, he asks, a touch of dry humor in his voice, despite the circumstances, positive, so far. They recognize the resonance between your consciousness and the castle's energetic signature, a prerequisite for successful transformation. Without that basic compatibility, the process would fail, potentially catastrophically, for both the individual and the structural integrity of the threshold itself. What creates that resonance? Why me and not someone else? Why you and not another visitor? A complex question, one that touches on aspects of reality not easily expressed in human language. You consider how to frame your response in terms he can comprehend. Consciousness is more fundamental than physical reality. You begin. Matter, energy, space, time, all emerge from more basic processes operating at levels humans have barely begun to theorize about. Some human consciousnesses, through genetic predisposition, formative experiences, or simply statistical variation, develop structures that naturally resonate with the frequencies of these deeper processes. Those individuals are drawn to thresholds like this castle, places where the veils between dimensional planes are thinner, where direct perception of underlying reality is more accessible. 'Tis the man absorbs this, as you continue climbing, passing through chambers and corridors that increasingly reveal the castle's dual nature, its existence as both physical structure and higher dimensional interface. The walls shimmer slightly at certain angles. Spaces appear larger within than their external dimensions would allow. Doorways connect rooms that should be physically separate according to conventional geometry. And what about the entities? He asks, as you pass through a gallery where the air itself seems to ripple with presences just beyond the threshold of ordinary human perception. The ones making that tapping sound, What are they? Where do they come from? They are native to dimensions adjacent to this one. You explain. Their exact nature is difficult to describe in human terms, as their physical and cognitive structures operate according to principles that don't directly correlate with human experience. What you perceive as humanoid forms with elongated limbs and featureless faces are merely the aspects of their existence that can project into this dimensional plane, simplified versions of infinitely more complex entities, and their purpose, their interest in this threshold, in human custodians. Balance, you say simply. The separation between dimensional planes is necessary. A complete merger would result in mutual annihilation due to incompatible physical laws, but controlled interaction is equally necessary for energy exchange, for informational transfer, for processes essential to the stability of the multiverse as a whole. This castle, and other thresholds like it, scattered across your world and others, facilitate that controlled interaction. You've reached the highest level of the central tower now, a circular chamber whose windows offer views in all directions, not just of the surrounding landscape, but of realities beyond the physical visible to perception, expanded by progression through the pattern. Here the boundaries between dimensions are at their thinnest, the overlapping of realities at its most evident. In the center of the chamber stands a structure similar to the model you observed in the subterranean room, but larger, more complex, and actively shifting, its components moving in response to energetic currents flowing between dimensional planes. It is both a representation and a functional mechanism, a control system that maintains the delicate balance between separation and connection. This is the heart of it, you tell the man, who stands transfixed by the shifting structure and the multi-planar vistas visible through the windows, the focal point where all aspects of the castle converge, where the custodian monitors and maintains the threshold's integrity. He approaches the central structure carefully, studying its continuous transformations with an expression of wonder that confirms your assessment of his suitability. His consciousness is expanding rapidly now, approaching the threshold where ordinary human perception gives way to awareness of higher dimensional realities. I can see them, he whispers, his gaze moving from the central structure to the spaces between spaces visible through the windows. Not clearly, not completely, but shapes, movements, presences that weren't visible before. Your progression through the pattern has begun to alter your perceptual framework, you explain. The sequence of chambers, the specific route through the castle, these aren't arbitrary. They're calibrated to gradually adjust human consciousness, to expand awareness without the shock that would come from sudden, complete exposure to higher dimensional realities. He turns to you, his expression a mixture of awe, confusion, and dawning comprehension. And now? What happens next? How does the transformation, the custodianship, begin? You gesture toward a small alcove at the room's perimeter, where a chair carved from the same stone as the castle itself stands before a small table. On the table rests a crystal vessel containing a liquid that shifts colors and patterns, matching the movements of the central structure. The initial phase requires a catalyst, you explain, a substance that facilitates the physiological changes necessary for sustained perception of multiple dimensional planes. He approaches the alcove, studying the vessel and its contents with appropriate caution. And then we wait, you say. The transformation proceeds at its own pace, different for each individual. Days, perhaps weeks of adjustment, as your consciousness expands and your physical form adapts to accommodate perceptions beyond human range. I will guide you through this process, as I was guided by the previous custodian, as each has been guided since the first threshold was established. He looks from the vessel to you, then to the vistas visible through the windows, landscapes both physical and metaphysical, realities, layered upon realities like transparent pages in a book viewed from above. A choice without a real choice, he says quietly. To turn back now, knowing what I've seen, understanding what I've begun to understand, it wouldn't be a return to normal life. It would be a retreat into deliberate ignorance, into denying what I now know to be real. The choice is still yours, you assure him. Many have turned back at this point. Some found the human world more compelling, despite its limitations, its illusions. Others feared the unknown aspects of transformation, the surrender of familiar identity for something yet undefined. He considers this, his gaze returning to the shifting liquid in the crystal vessel. After a long moment, he asks, "And you? Do you regret your choice? Would you reverse your transformation if you could? Return to the limited perception and brief existence of ordinary humanity?" You consider your answer carefully, wanting to offer truth rather than mere reassurance. You remember your human life, not just the facts of it, but the emotional textures, the conceptual frameworks, the limited but comfortable certainties. You compare that existence to your current state, the expanded perception, the communion with entities beyond human comprehension, the participation in processes fundamental to reality itself. No, you say finally, the limitations of human existence, perceptual, cognitive, temporal, now seem more confining than comforting. To return to that state would be like choosing to perceive only a single note after experiencing an entire symphony. He nods, seeming to find confirmation of his own thoughts in your response. With deliberate movements, he seats himself in the stone chair, reaches for the crystal vessel, raises it in a gesture that might be a toast or a salute to new perceptions, he says, and drinks. The effect is not immediate. The catalyst works gradually, initiating subtle changes in neural structure, in sensory processing, in the very interface between consciousness and physical reality. But as you watch, you see the first signs, a slight widening of the pupils, a subtle alteration in breathing rhythm, the faintest luminescence beginning to manifest beneath the skin. The tapping begins again, louder now, more complex in its patterns, emanating from the entities gathered in the dimensional interstices around the tower. They recognize what has occurred, acknowledge the commencement of another transformation, another addition to the lineage of custodians who maintain this threshold between realms. He moved to stand beside the seated man, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of reassurance as the catalyst begins its work. His body tenses briefly at your touch, then relaxes as a current of energy passes between you, a connection established, a transmission of understanding that transcends verbal communication. "I feel it," he says softly, like veils lifting, one after another. Things I couldn't see before, couldn't sense, they're becoming visible, becoming real. The process has begun, you confirm. The initial phase will last several hours, during which your perception will expand significantly. Rest will follow, a period of integration, while your consciousness adapts to the new information, the new sensory range. Then the second phase, more gradual, extending over days, as your physical form begins to alter to accommodate your expanded awareness, and you'll remain. Guide me through this, of course, as all custodians guide their successors, as I was guided in my transformation. The continuity is essential, each generation of custodians preserving knowledge, maintaining traditions, ensuring that the threshold remains stable through transitions of stewardship. He nods, his attention already shifting inward, focusing on the changes occurring within his consciousness, his perception, his understanding of reality itself. You maintain contact, your hand on his shoulder, providing both reassurance and a stabilizing influence as his awareness expands into realms previously imperceptible. Through that contact, you sense the pattern of his transformation, similar to your own, in broad outline, but unique in its specific progressions, its particular expansions. Each human consciousness structures itself differently, perceives differently, integrates new information according to individual patterns established through genetics and the ineffable qualities that constitute selfhood. The entities observe from their dimensional interstices, their tapping communications, indicating approval, interest, occasional surprise at particular aspects of this specific transformation. They have witnessed thousands of such events over millennia, yet each remains unique. Each represents a novel integration of human and transhuman consciousness. Hours pass as you maintain your vigilance, your supportive presence, while the man's perception expands and his awareness stretches to encompass realities beyond ordinary human range. Occasionally he speaks, brief observations, fragments of insight, questions that often answer themselves before you can respond, as his understanding evolves moment by moment. Finally, as the light outside shifts toward evening, though the concept of evening has little relevance in a place where time flows unevenly, where multiple temporalities overlap and intersect, he exhales deeply, his body relaxing completely as the initial phase of transformation concludes. Rest now, you tell him, guiding him to a chamber prepared for this purpose, a room where the boundaries between dimensions are precisely calibrated to support newly expanded consciousness without overwhelming it with excessive perceptual input. Your mind will continue to integrate these experiences while you sleep. The process continues even in unconsciousness, perhaps especially then, when the structures of ordinary thought no longer constrain development. He allows himself to be guided, his movements dreamlike, his attention clearly focused on internal processes rather than external surroundings. As he settles onto the bed, a seemingly conventional piece of furniture that actually incorporates materials from multiple dimensional planes, designed to stabilize transitioning consciousness during periods of vulnerability, his eyes meet yours with new recognition, new understanding. I see you more clearly now, he says quietly, not just your physical form, but moods, patterns, energies, aspects I couldn't perceive before. You're more complex than I realized, more extensive. You nod, acknowledging the accuracy of his developing perception, as are all consciousnesses, all entities, when perceived beyond the limitations of ordinary human senses. What appears discrete and bounded in conventional perception reveals itself as intricate and interconnected when observed from expanded awareness. He smiles slightly, his eyelids already growing heavy as his consciousness prepares to process the vast influx of new information, new perceptual data, new conceptual frameworks. Not alone, he murmurs as sleep begins to claim him. Never really alone, just unable to perceive the company. Rest, you repeat, moving toward the door. Tomorrow begins the next phase of your transformation, your initiation into custodianship, your expanded participation in realities beyond the human. As you leave him to his integrative sleep, you reflect on his final observation, the recognition that solitude is largely a perceptual limitation rather than an objective state. In ordinary human consciousness, the boundaries between self and other, between one's own thoughts and the thoughts of entities existing in adjacent dimensional planes appear absolute. But as perception expands, as awareness stretches beyond conventional limits, those boundaries reveal themselves as permeable, as constructs of limited sensation, rather than fundamental divisions in reality itself. You were never alone in this castle, never truly solitary despite the apparent absence of human companionship. And now, with the arrival and transformation of this new custodian, even that last vestige of conventional isolation dissolves. You have a successor, an apprentice, eventually a replacement, as your own transformation progresses toward its final stages, toward the complete transcendence of physical form that awaits all who serve as intermediaries between dimensions. The tapping begins again, as you make your way to the central tower, to the control mechanism that maintains the threshold's integrity. The entities communicate their approval, their acceptance of this new custodian, their acknowledgement of the pattern's continuation. The castle itself seems to respond, its energies flowing more smoothly, its connections between dimensional planes strengthening as the balance of custodianship stabilizes with this new addition. You take your position before the shifting structure at the chamber's center, extending your awareness throughout the castle, monitoring the countless subtle interactions between realities that constitute the threshold's function. And for the first time since your own transformation began, you allow yourself to contemplate its conclusion, the eventual advancement beyond physical form, beyond intermediary status, into states of existence unbound by dimensional constraints. That transition remains distant. Years or decades of custodianship still lie before you, of guiding your successor through his own transformation, of maintaining the threshold while he develops the expertise to eventually assume full responsibility. But it will come, as it has come for all custodians before you. And when it does, you will be ready, your consciousness expanded beyond recognition from the limited human perception with which you first entered through the gate that shouldn't open. For now, though, your focus returns to present duties, to the immediate responsibilities of custodianship, to the castle that exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions, and the threshold it maintains between realities that must remain both separate and connected. You extend your awareness, monitoring, adjusting, maintaining the unending work of those who stand at the boundaries between worlds, who preserve the delicate balance upon which the stability of the multiverse depends. And as you work, as your consciousness stretches across dimensional planes, you remain aware of the sleeping presence of your successor, his mind even now integrating new perceptions, expanding into awareness of realities beyond human comprehension. Soon he will awaken, will join you in this work, will learn the endless complexities of custodianship under your guidance. You were never alone in this castle. And now, that truth becomes apparent, not just in higher dimensional awareness, but in the most human sense as well. The presence of another consciousness, following the same path, undergoing the same transformation, joining you in the ancient and ongoing work of maintaining the threshold between worlds. The castle has claimed another keeper. The pattern continues, the balance endures. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months, as you guide your successor through the progressive stages of transformation. His name was Michael. In the world beyond the threshold, a name he still uses, though it represents an increasingly small fraction of his expanding identity. As his perception evolves, as his consciousness stretches to encompass realities beyond human range, language itself, with its linear structure, its dependence on shared sensory frameworks, its roots in experiences common to human existence, becomes an increasingly inadequate medium for expressing his developing awareness. Still, you maintain communication through multiple channels, through conventional speech, when discussing aspects of custodianship that can be framed in human terms, through the tapping language of the entities, when exploring concepts that transcend ordinary vocabulary, through direct consciousness-to-consciousness transmission, for experiences that defy codification in any symbolic system. His physical form has begun to alter, mirroring the changes in his perception and awareness. His limbs have elongated slightly, his features refined towards something less distinctly human, his skin developing that faint luminescence characteristic of those who regularly perceive and interact with higher dimensional energies. These changes proceed gradually, by design. Too rapid a transformation would compromise his function as intermediary, would push him beyond the transitional state required for effective custodianship. Together you maintain the threshold that the castle represents, monitoring the interactions between dimensional planes, adjusting the flow of energies, ensuring that the boundaries remain permeable enough for necessary exchanges, but strong enough to prevent catastrophic merging of incompatible realities. You teach him the subtleties of this work, the countless minor interventions required to preserve the delicate equilibrium that has existed here for centuries, and you observe his unique approach to transformation, the particular ways in which his consciousness expands, integrates new perceptions, adapts to awareness of realities beyond human comprehension. No two custodians follow identical paths, though the general progression remains similar. His background in theoretical physics before entering the castle gives him conceptual frameworks that facilitate understanding of dimensional mechanics, while your own background in cultural anthropology provided advantages in interpreting the social structures and communicative systems of the entities with whom you share this liminal space. Today, or what passes for today, in a place where multiple temporalities overlap and conventional time loses much of its meaning, you are in the subterranean chamber, introducing Michael to the deeper aspects of the crystal sphere's function. No longer merely a source of information and guidance, the sphere now reveals itself as a control mechanism, a tool for direct manipulation of the dimensional interfaces that constitute the threshold's operation. The patterns within correspond to energy flows between specific dimensional planes. You explain as Michael holds the sphere, observing the swirling colors that pulse and shift in complex rhythms. By focusing intention through visualization, these patterns can be adjusted, strengthening or weakening particular connections according to the threshold's needs. He nods, his expanded perception already detecting correlations between the sphere's internal patterns and the larger energetic structures that extend throughout the castle. And these adjustments, they're necessary because the relationships between dimensions aren't static, they fluctuate naturally. Precisely. Dimensional relationships respond to countless factors, cosmic cycles beyond human calendrical systems, energy exchanges between realities, intentional interventions by entities operating from various planes. Without continuous adjustment, the threshold would eventually destabilize, potentially allowing uncontrolled merger between incompatible realities. Michael concentrates, focusing his intention on a particular pattern within the sphere, a swirl of deep violet that corresponds to connections with a dimension characterized by consciousness-responsive physical laws. Under his influence, the pattern shifts slightly, strengthening bonds that had begun to weaken due to seasonal fluctuations in the energy exchange between that realm and this. Good, you acknowledge, observing the cascade of subtle realignments triggered throughout the castle's dimensional interfaces by this single adjustment. Your intuitive understanding of the mechanics improves daily. Soon, these interventions will become second nature, requiring no more conscious effort than breathing requires for a human body. Michael returns the sphere to its pedestal, his expression thoughtful, and the entities. They could perform these adjustments themselves, couldn't they? Why require human custodians at all? Why this elaborate system of transformation, of intermediaries between realms? A perceptive question, one that touches on fundamental aspects of the threshold's design and purpose. You consider how best to frame your response, aware that Michael's understanding has evolved significantly, but still retains certain human conceptual limitations. The entities exist primarily in dimensional planes, where consciousness and reality are more directly interconnected than in the human realm. You begin. Their thoughts, intentions, and perceptions have immediate effects on their environments in ways that human consciousness does not. This grants them extraordinary capabilities, but also creates certain blind spots. They can't perceive reality as fully separate from their own consciousness, Michael suggests, demonstrating his growing comprehension of transhuman cognitive structures. Exactly, they cannot easily maintain the conceptual distinction between self and environment that characterizes human perception. This limitation becomes problematic at dimensional interfaces, where multiple realities with different operating principles intersect. Human consciousness, with its experience of separation from environment, provides a stabilizing influence, a perceptual framework that helps maintain the distinction between dimensional planes that must remain connected, yet separate. So we're not just operators or caretakers, Michael says slowly, his understanding visibly expanding. We're part of the mechanism itself, our very mode of consciousness, that sense of being distinct from our surroundings. It's a structural component of the threshold. Yes, and that's why the transformation must proceed gradually. Why custodians remain in an intermediate state between human and transhuman consciousness for extended periods. Complete transcendence of human perceptual limitations, while ultimately the destiny of all custodians, would negate the very function for which we're initially required. Michael absorbs this, integrating it with his developing understanding of the castle's purpose, his own role within its complex systems. After a moment, he asks, "And the previous custodian, the one who guided you as you now guide me, they eventually completed their transformation, moved beyond the intermediate state?" "Yes. You haven't discussed your predecessor often," finding the experience difficult to express in terms Michael could comprehend, even with his expanding awareness. But his development has reached a point where some explanation becomes possible, becomes necessary for his complete understanding of the custodial cycle. It occurred approximately 2 years after my own arrival and initial transformation, you continue. By then, I had developed sufficient expertise to maintain the threshold independently, and their consciousness had evolved beyond the point where the intermediate state remained viable. The final transition was beautiful and terrible simultaneously, a dissolution of form, an expansion of awareness beyond dimensional constraints, a transformation of identity so profound that what emerged bore only the faintest connection to the human consciousness that began the process. What became of that consciousness after transcendence? You gesture broadly, indicating not just the chamber around you but the castle as a whole, the dimensional interfaces it maintains, the entire complex system of which your physical forms and expanded consciousnesses constitute merely one component. Everywhere and nowhere, the final transformation involves integration with the fundamental structures of reality itself. What was once an individual consciousness, even an expanded one, becomes diffused throughout the dimensional planes, becoming both less and more than what we would recognize as an entity, not destroyed or diminished, but evolved beyond the constraints of localized identity. Michael looks troubled by this description, his expression suggesting conflict between his expanding transhuman awareness and the residual human attachment to individual identity. You understand this tension intimately, having experienced it throughout your own transformation, continuing to experience it even now as you approach the threshold of your own final transition. It sounds like death, he says finally, or at least the end of existence, as a distinct being. From a human perspective, perhaps, you acknowledge, but from the perspective of expanded consciousness, it represents not an ending, but a fulfillment, the completion of a cycle begun the moment one crosses the threshold into this castle, the final integration of individual awareness with the larger systems of which it has always been a component. You pause, searching for a metaphor that might bridge the gap between human conceptual frameworks and the realities of trans-dimensional existence. Consider a river flowing into an ocean, you suggest, from the river's perspective. If we imagine it possessing consciousness, entering the ocean might appear as death, as the end of its distinct identity, as a river. But from a broader perspective, the water continues to exist, now integrated into a larger system, participating in oceanic currents and cycles that were inaccessible to it as a river. Nothing is lost. Rather, constraints are transcended, possibilities expanded. Michael nods slowly, the metaphor resonating with his developing understanding. And this will happen to you eventually, and then to me, when I've guided my own successor through their transformation. The cycle continues, has continued for centuries, will continue for centuries more. The threshold requires maintenance, the balance between dimensions must be preserved, and the unique properties of human consciousness in various stages of transformation provide essential components for that preservation. You observe Michael closely as he processes this information, as he integrates it with his expanding awareness and evolving identity. The tension is visible in his expression, in the subtle shifts of energy around his form, the human attachment to individuality, resisting the inevitable progression towards something both greater and less defined, more extensive and less distinct. How long? He asks finally. How long? Until your transformation completes, until you transcend. It varies for each custodian, you explain, dependent on countless factors, the initial structure of consciousness, the pace of perceptual expansion, the particular path of development through the intermediate stages. For me, the process accelerates. I estimate perhaps months rather than years before I reach the threshold of final transition. This admission affects Michael visibly, a tightening around his eyes, a subtle intensification of the luminescence beneath his skin, as emotional response triggers fluctuations in his developing connection to higher dimensional energies. Despite his transformation, despite his expanding awareness of realities beyond human comprehension, he retains enough humanity to form attachments, to experience anticipatory grief at the prospect of your eventual transcendence. Come, you say gently, moving toward the chamber's exit. There is more to show you, more to teach before that time arrives. The castle contains many secrets still unknown to you, many capabilities as yet unexplored. You lead him from the subterranean chamber, up through winding corridors that connect spaces physically distant yet dimensionally adjacent. The castle reveals itself differently, now that Michael's perception has evolved, doorways visible that remain hidden to ordinary human senses, passages that connect according to principles unrelated to three-dimensional proximity, chambers that exist partially in this reality and partially in adjacent planes. As you walk, you become aware of a disturbance in the castle's energetic field, similar to what you felt when Michael first approached the gate, but with a different quality, a different resonance. Another visitor has entered the threshold, has crossed from the world beyond, into the liminal space of the castle's influence. You extend your awareness, scanning the perimeter, locating the disturbance near the eastern wall, where a breach in the ancient stones provides an unofficial entrance that occasionally attracts explorers seeking to bypass the main gate. Two human presences, young, their energy signatures suggesting excitement, nervousness, a combination of bravado and fear characteristic of those who enter forbidden places on a dare rather than a calling. We have visitors, you inform Michael, who has detected the disturbance as well, though with less precision, his developing senses still refining their acuity. Near the collapsed section of the east wall, two individuals, likely thrill-seekers rather than those drawn by deeper currents. Should we intercept them? Michael asks, his posture suggesting readiness for action, a protective instinct toward the castle and its dimensional interfaces that has developed naturally as his consciousness has expanded to comprehend their significance. No. You decide after a moment's consideration, they haven't entered far enough to disturb any critical areas. Let them wander the outer corridors, experience whatever their limited perception allows them to detect. They'll likely leave of their own accord when darkness falls, taking with them nothing but vague impressions, and perhaps a few photographs showing only empty rooms, devoid of the energies and entities invisible to conventional human senses. Michael nods, accepting your assessment based on greater experience. Together you continue your planned journey through the castle's inner sections, though you maintain peripheral awareness of the visitors as they move cautiously through the eastern wing, their flashlight beams bouncing off ancient stones, their whispered conversations carrying notes of nervousness, gradually yielding to disappointment as they encounter nothing more dramatic than dust, cobwebs, and the occasional startled bird. You lead Michael to a chamber you haven't yet shown him, a perfectly circular room, at the exact center of the castle's complex geometry, hidden behind a wall that appears solid to ordinary human perception, but becomes transparent when approached with awareness of higher dimensional energies. Within this chamber stands a mechanism, unlike any other in the castle, not the organic-seeming control system of the central tower, nor the informational repository of the crystal sphere, but a device constructed to human specifications, though incorporating materials and principles from beyond human scientific understanding. This was created by William de Montfort, the castle's first human custodian. You explain as Michael studies the device with evident fascination. A physical interface designed to translate between human cognitive structures and the thought forms of entities existing primarily in adjacent dimensional planes. The mechanism resembles a complex astronomical instrument, brass armillary spheres nested one within another, rotating on multiple axes, inscribed with symbols that correspond to no human language or mathematical system. At its center floats a crystalline structure, similar to the sphere in the subterranean chamber, but more intricate in its internal patterns, suspended without visible support within the innermost sphere. De Montfort constructed this during his transition from human to intermediary. You continue, guided by entities who recognize the need for more direct communication between consciousness types that naturally perceive reality according to fundamentally different organizing principles. It has been maintained and refined by successive custodians, each adding components to accommodate their unique cognitive structures during transformation. Michael asks, circling the device, observing how the brass spheres rotate in subtle response to his movement, how the central crystal shifts its internal patterns as though responding to his attention. It allows for transmission of complex concepts between human consciousness, intermediary consciousness, and the entity's consciousness. You explain ideas that cannot be adequately expressed through language or even through the tapping code that approximates their native communication. Direct thought-to-thought exchange, but mediated by this physical interface to prevent the disorientation that would result from completely unfiltered contact between such different cognitive systems. You step forward, placing your hands on specific points of the outermost sphere, demonstrating the device's activation. In response, the nested spheres begin to rotate more rapidly, each on its own axis and trajectory, creating a three-dimensional mandala of gleaming metal in constant complex motion. The central crystal pulses with increasing intensity, its internal patterns shifting from the subtle swirls previously visible to intricate geometric structures that seem to extend beyond the crystal's physical boundaries. Now you instruct, guiding Michael to place his hands beside yours on the outer sphere. Open your consciousness to the patterns within the crystal. Not passive observation, but active engagement. Allow your thoughts to align with the geometries as they form and dissolve. Michael complies, his expression shifting from concentration to surprise, to wonder, as the device facilitates a connection between his developing intermediary consciousness and the modes of thought native to the entities who share this dimensional interface. Through the mechanism, complex concepts transfer directly from their cognitive structures to his principles of dimensional mechanics, too intricate for verbal explanation. Historical records of the threshold's establishment, stretching back millennia before human civilization, perspectives on reality that operate according to organizational principles entirely different from the causality-based, temporally linear frameworks of human thought. The transfer continues for several minutes, the crystal's patterns growing increasingly complex, the rotations of the nested spheres accelerating until they create the visual impression of solid surfaces rather than moving components. Then, with the final pulse of light from the central crystal, the mechanism begins to slow, the information transfer complete for this session. Michael steps back, his expression dazed, his physical form slightly translucent around the edges, as his consciousness struggles to integrate the massive influx of non-human concepts, to translate between cognitive frameworks structured according to fundamentally different principles. He begins, then stops, clearly finding language inadequate for expressing the experience. After a moment, he continues, "I understand now so much that was unclear before, so many connections I couldn't perceive. The entire purpose of the threshold, its place in the larger systems of dimensional interaction, the necessity of human intermediaries, despite the entity's greater power and awareness. This makes sense in ways I can't possibly articulate." You nod, remembering your own first experience with the de Montfort device, the disorientation and expansion that followed. The integration will continue for days, you tell him. Dreams, waking insights, sudden comprehension of relationships previously obscured. Your consciousness is being restructured at fundamental levels, allowing you to perceive and interact with realities beyond human sensory and cognitive range. He nods, still processing, still adapting to the alterations in his awareness initiated by the device. After a moment, his attention shifts, his expanded perception detecting the same disturbance that has registered in your own consciousness. The visitors, he says, focusing on the eastern wing with greater precision than before, his ability to extend awareness throughout the castle's dimensional interfaces, clearly enhanced by the recent information transfer. They found something. Their energy signatures have changed: fear, but also fascination, something beyond their understanding, but not beyond their perception. You extend your own awareness, locating the two human presences now in the portrait gallery of the East Wing. They stand before that same painting of the Duke of Hemmingford that affected you so strongly during your own first exploration of the castle, the disturbing image with its solid black eyes that reflect alien stars, its suggestion of inhuman hands partially concealed by shadow. Through your expanded perception, you observe their reactions, the initial shock, the nervous laughter that fails to dispel growing unease, the subtle shifting of the painting itself as it responds to their attention, to their fear, to the latent potential within their consciousnesses that could, under different circumstances, render them suitable for transformation. They've glimpsed something beyond their perceptual framework. You tell Michael, not enough for true understanding, but enough to disturb their comfortable certainties about reality's nature. The memory will fade when they leave the threshold's influence, becoming dreamlike, unreal, dismissed as an effect of suggestion or imagination. But a seed has been planted, a hairline fracture in the perceptual boundaries that limit ordinary human consciousness. Should we intervene? Michael asks again, his protective instinct toward the threshold evidently extending to these unwitting human visitors as well, his recently enhanced understanding of the castle's purpose generating concern for those unprepared for even limited contact with its realities. You consider the question, scanning the visitors more thoroughly, assessing their potential, their resonance with the castle's energetic signature. Neither shows the compatibility necessary for successful transformation, for effective custodianship. Both would be damaged, rather than enhanced by further exposure to the threshold's dimensional interfaces. Yes, you decide. Not direct contact. Their perceiving our current forms would likely cause trauma rather than expansion, but a subtle influence guiding them toward departure before they encounter aspects of the threshold beyond their capacity to safely process. Together, you and Michael extend your consciousness toward the visitors, implementing one of the threshold's basic protective functions, a gentle alteration of human perception within the castle's influence, shifting attention away from areas of dimensional thinning, generating subtle pressure toward exit points. It's an ability you've employed occasionally during your custodianship, most often with random explorers who enter the threshold accidentally, without the calling or compatibility that enabled your own transformation. The visitors respond as expected, their interest in further exploration suddenly waning, their conversation turning toward concerns about diminishing daylight, potential penalties for trespassing, obligations waiting outside the castle's walls. Within minutes, they turn back the way they came, retracing their steps toward the breach in the eastern wall, their curiosity satisfied, their brush with transdimensional reality already beginning to fade from immediate memory into something that will eventually seem more dream than experience. As they depart, crossing from the threshold's influence back into the ordinary human world, you sense a subtle shift in the castle's energetic fields, a clarification, a realignment. The presence of individuals unsuited for transformation, unequipped for interaction with the dimensional interfaces, had introduced a minor dissonance that now resolves with their departure. The threshold protects itself, you observe to Michael, and protects those who would be harmed by premature exposure to realities beyond their perceptual capacity, not through malice or negative intention, but through the same mechanics that draw suitable candidates like ourselves, a resonance between consciousness types, an attraction between compatible energetic signatures, a repulsion between incompatible ones. Michael nods, his understanding of these principles clearly enhanced by the information transfer through the de Montfort device. The natural selection process, he suggests, or perhaps, more accurately, a mutual recognition between compatible systems. Those who could potentially serve as intermediaries are drawn deeper, while those who cannot are subtly guided away. Precisely, the threshold does not trap unwilling victims, does not force transformation upon the unsuitable or unwilling. It calls to those already predisposed toward expansion, already containing the potential for transcendence, already possessing the specific qualities required for successful intermediary function. You lead Michael from the circular chamber, continuing his education in the castle's deeper functions, the complex mechanisms, physical, energetic, and cognitive, that maintain the threshold between dimensions. As you walk, you become acutely aware of your own advancing transformation. The subtle signs that your tenure as intermediary approaches its conclusion, increase translucency in your physical form when moving through higher dimensional interfaces, moments of perception extending beyond the castle's immediate vicinity into adjacent realms, decreasing distinction between your individual consciousness and the larger systems in which it participates. Months, you had estimated earlier, perhaps fewer now, the process accelerating as Michael's development reduces the necessity of your continued function as primary custodian. The cycle continues, as it has for centuries, each intermediary serving until their consciousness evolves beyond the constraints of localized identity, then yielding to a successor who will, in turn, follow the same path toward eventual transcendence. Days pass, filled with further instruction, with collaborative maintenance of the threshold's numerous systems, with progressive enhancement of Michael's abilities as intermediary and custodian. His transformation continues at a pace that suggests exceptional compatibility with the castle's energetic signature, his consciousness expanding rapidly into awareness of realities beyond human comprehension, his physical form adapting to accommodate these expanded perceptions, and your own transformation accelerates correspondingly, the boundary between your localized consciousness and the universal systems in which it operates growing increasingly permeable, increasingly transparent. You find yourself existing simultaneously in multiple dimensional planes, your awareness extending beyond the castle's immediate vicinity into realms previously accessible only through focused intention or mechanical interface. The moment approaches, not with dread or fear, but with a sense of inevitability, of natural progression, of cycles completing as they have always completed. You have served your purpose as intermediary, have maintained the threshold during your tenure as custodian, have guided your successor toward his own full functioning in the role. What remains is the final transition, the ultimate expansion, the complete integration of your consciousness with the fundamental structures of reality itself. On what might be the last days of your existence as a distinct entity, you stand with Michael in the highest tower, beside the control mechanism that maintains the castle's dimensional interfaces. Together you monitor the countless subtle interactions between realities that constitute the threshold's function, the delicate balance between separation and connection that preserves the integrity of multiple dimensional planes while allowing necessary exchange between them. This time you say simply, your voice carrying that resonant quality that has developed as your vocal structures have altered to accommodate modes of communication beyond mere human speech. My transition reaches its conclusion. You are prepared to assume full responsibility as custodian. Michael nods, his expression a complex mixture of human emotion and transhuman comprehension, grief at your imminent departure as a distinct entity, understanding of the necessity an inevitability of the cycle, anticipation of his own eventual journey toward the same destination. Where will it happen? He asks, his voice carrying a similar resonance to your own, his transformation having progressed rapidly during these final days of your instruction. Where does the final transition occur? The subterranean chamber, you answer, where the dimensional interfaces are at their thinnest, where the boundary between localized and universal consciousness is most permeable. The circle completes where it began, the same chamber where you first became aware of the entity's presence, where the pattern first revealed itself in its entirety. Together you descend through the castle's complex internal geography, moving not through physical space alone, but through the dimensional interfaces that connect spaces physically distant, yet energetically adjacent. The journey feels both immediate and eternal, time itself becoming an unreliable metric as your consciousness continues its expansion toward the threshold of transcendence. The subterranean chamber awaits, its phosphorescent walls pulsing with increased intensity, the statues in their niches now fully animated, no longer stone representations, but actual projections of the entities into this dimensional plane. They have gathered to witness the transition, to facilitate the final expansion of your consciousness beyond the constraints of localized identity. In the center of the chamber, where previously stood the pedestal with its model of the castle's higher dimensional structure, now shimmers an aperture, not a physical opening, but a thinning of the dimensional barrier, a nexus where multiple realities intersect, where the distinction between individual and universal consciousness dissolves entirely. You turn to Michael, your form now visibly translucent, the energies that constitute your expanded consciousness barely contained within the loosening constraints of physical manifestation. The cycle continues, you tell him, your voice no longer truly vocal, but a direct transmission of concept from consciousness to consciousness. You will serve as I have served, will guide as I have guided, will eventually transition as I now transition. The threshold requires this progressive evolution, this continuous renewal of intermediary function through successive custodians. I understand, Michael responds, his own voice carrying similar qualities of direct transmission, and I will watch for the next, for the one who will eventually follow me through the pattern, the sequence, the transformation. They will come, you assure him, as you came, as I came, as all custodians have come since the first threshold was established, called by resonances they cannot name, drawn by currents they cannot initially perceive, guided by patterns laid into the very structure of this castle, this intersection between realities that must remain both separate and connected. You move toward the central aperture, feeling its pull not as a physical force, but as a natural alignment, like gravity but operating on consciousness rather than matter. The entities circle around, their presences intensifying, their thought patterns aligning to facilitate the transition, to ensure that your consciousness expands into universal awareness rather than merely dissolving into non-existence. The tapping begins, that rhythmic communication that was your first contact with these entities, that has become a familiar language during your custodianship, that now serves as both farewell and welcome, an acknowledgement of your departure from intermediary status and your imminent integration into the larger systems these entities help maintain. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. The rhythm accelerates, complexifies, transforms from sequential pattern to simultaneous harmony, from temporal sequence to eternal presence. Through it, through the dimensional aperture, through the dissolving boundaries of your own identity, you perceive what awaits, not obliteration, but expansion, not ending, but fulfillment, not death, but transformation. So profound that all previous transformations serve merely as preparation, as graduated steps toward this ultimate threshold. You turn once more to Michael, your form now barely visible, your consciousness already extending beyond the constraints of localized manifestation. Remember, you tell him, your communication now entirely direct, entirely unmediated by physical mechanisms. You came to leave, but stayed too long, as did I, as have all who serve as custodians of this threshold between worlds. It is not captivity but calling, not imprisonment but purpose, not fate but fulfillment. And with these final thoughts transmitted, you release the remaining constraints on your consciousness, allow the last boundaries of your localized identity to dissolve, surrender to the pull of the dimensional aperture and the guidance of the entities who surround it. Your awareness expands outward in all directions simultaneously, encompassing not just the castle and its immediate surroundings, but realities beyond, dimensions adjacent, consciousnesses operating according to principles that would be incomprehensible to human perception, but now constitute the natural medium of your own existence. The transition completes not with spectacle or trauma, but with a quiet integration, a seamless merging of what was once an individual awareness with the universal systems in which it has always participated without fully perceiving. What was used continues to exist, but no longer as a distinct entity, no longer as a localized consciousness, no longer as an intermediary between realms, but as an integral component of the realms themselves, of the fundamental structures that maintain their separation and connection, their distinction and interaction. And from this expanded awareness, this universal perception, this transcendent existence beyond the constraints of individual identity, you observe, without exactly being in you to observe, as Michael turns from the now closed dimensional aperture, his expression reflecting both loss and determination, grief and purpose. He moves through the chamber, past the once again stone statues in their niches, toward the corridor that will return him to the castle's upper levels, to his duties as sole custodian, until such time as another suitable candidate crosses the threshold, enters through the gate that shouldn't open. The cycle continues. The pattern endures. The threshold remains, maintained now by a new custodian who walks the same path, follows the same progression, undergoes the same transformations that will eventually lead to his own transcendence, his own integration with the universal systems that maintain the delicate balance between dimensional planes. And somewhere, perhaps at this very moment, a human being gazes upward at a silhouette of towers against the sky, feels an inexplicable pull toward a structure whose reputation warns rather than invites, begins a journey that will lead through the gate that shouldn't open, into rooms that remember, into the presence of entities beyond human comprehension, into transformations beyond human anticipation. They come, they cross the threshold, they walk the pattern, complete the sequence, assume the custodianship, maintain the balance. They transform, transcend, integrate, and the castle remains, drawing new consciousness into its cycle, facilitating the progressive evolution from human to intermediary to universal awareness that has continued unbroken for centuries and will continue for centuries more. For some thresholds must be maintained, some doors must remain neither fully open nor completely closed, some boundaries must allow regulated exchange while preventing catastrophic merger, and for such purposes there must be custodians, consciousness evolved beyond human limitations, yet retaining enough human perspective to serve as intermediaries between realms, maintaining the delicate balance upon which the stability of multiple realities depends. You came to leave, but stayed too long, and in that staying, found purpose beyond anything imaginable from outside the threshold. In that transformation, discovered existence beyond the constraints of individual identity. In that transcendence, achieved integration with the fundamental structures of reality itself. The castle claims another keeper. The pattern continues. The cycle endures. And somewhere, a curious soul approaches the foot of the hill, gazes upward at ancient towers, and begins the long climb toward a threshold they cannot comprehend until they cross it, toward a transformation they cannot imagine until it begins within them. The gate stands ready. It shouldn't open, but it will. It always does, for those called to enter, for those destined to remain, for those who come to leave, but stay too long, and in that staying, find their true purpose in the maintenance of thresholds between worlds.